Welcome back to season 2 of the podcast. I've got some brand new guests I'm super excited to chat to and learn from for future expeditions. It's been a very long time. It's been something I've been desperate to get started again, and I'm really pleased to announce I've also got some new expeditions lined up. I'm going to be going to do the coast of Taiwan, the coast of Ireland, and something even bigger beyond that if I can be successful. If you'd like to support the expeditions and support me, you can look at the fundraiser at www.gofundme.com/GarmanJosh, which is GarmanJosh, or you can find me on social media under Josh Garman. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, pretty much everything. It's really good to be back, and I'm excited to have you with me. So let's get started. It's been a while.
Okay. Well, as long as the illusion's there. That's what editing's for.
That's the thing. As long as people think this is a real podcast, then we're fine.
Wow.
Cool. Okay.
That's how it works when you're riding bikes too. As long as people think you're a real bike rider, it's fine.
So, I mean, do you class yourself as a real bike rider then? I mean, surely now after the trips you've done, you kind of have confidence in yourself.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I'd probably, if someone asked me what I was as a person, I'd probably say a bike rider, because that's pretty much what I've done for, well, as long as I can remember, since I was, my first race was when I was 14.
Okay, and then so was bikes interest before then, or what?
Yeah, so I kind of, I remember watching like the Tour de France when it was on like Channel 4 back in the day. So that would have been like 97, 98, maybe even 96. And I remember kind of buying the mountain bike magazines and stuff in probably 1997, 1998. But yeah, so what would I have been then? Don't even know. 11, 12 maybe?
Okay. I was born in 1998, so slightly worrying.
Well, you're now making me feel old. That's the thing. Okay. I think I'm quite young and kind of one of the younger people, and then suddenly I've realised that there's people who are like born in the 2000s, almost like winning Grand Tours and stuff like that. Not quite like that, but not far off. Yeah. And yeah, it's just weird.
Like, so you had your early days in you're 14 years old, you said, when you kind of really got into it, started racing, but you'd always held an interest for it.
Yeah, well, I think that when you're a kid, you don't really, well, you're kind of developing, aren't you, what you're interested in? And I found myself drawn to kind of, I don't know, bike racing. I don't know why. It just kind of seemed relatively interesting. I think even before I ever started or knew about cycling as a sport as such, kind of riding a bike around the garden. Once I learned to ride, because it took me absolutely ages. That's a whole different
did it really?
story.
That's interesting. No, tell a story.
Yeah, probably couldn't ride a bike till I was about 7 or something like that.
Really? Okay.
But then once I could, like riding my bike around the garden and stuff was one of the go-to kind of things to do.
So was anyone pushing you to get into cycling, or is it really just your thing?
Well, not initially, and then my stepdad, he was, when sort of him and mum got together when I was probably 9 or 10. This was kind of like he'd started mountain biking in the 90s, which was when it was kind of, it's not like it is nowadays, with like enduro and suspension and stuff like that. It was very much in the kind of just coming out of the fluorescent lycra and very high saddles cross country stage. And downhill racing was kind of establishing itself as a kind of like a sport in its own right. And obviously, being a kid, you're going to like the downhill racing, aren't you? Unfortunately, I live in Cambridgeshire and it's flat and there's no hills, so I kind of ended up doing cross country racing. But yeah, my parents, mum and stepdad, started doing the local races, and actually they did a few, probably when I was 13 or so, and they asked me for a while if I wanted to go and do them, and I was like, oh no, I don't want to do that. And then I did the first one, and it's kind of one of those things, isn't it? And well, here we are. That was 2014, and what are we now? 2023, and I've raced every year since. But yeah, I wasn't kind of, I wasn't that good, to be honest. I think I was more enthusiastic than talented. I think I came last at my first race, probably second to last at the second race, and then I did the national series. It was called the National Point Series at the time. So I would have been in the youth category, which would be 14 to 15.
Okay.
I think. No, juvenile. I would have been 13 to 14, and then I went up into youth. So I started as a juvenile. So I did the national probably as a juvenile. Again, I was pretty much last, but I just kind of stuck at it. And I don't know. It seems to have got out of hand over the years.
Well, did it matter if you did well? Did it ever matter, or was it kind of like a drive, like an ambitious drive, or did you just love doing it?
Well, a bit of both. I think I was a bit annoyed I was coming last. I think.
Okay.
The truth is, I've won very few races in my life, and I think I actually like. The more I think about it, when you get older, I think I've kind of figured that I quite enjoy trying to like just better myself a bit and push myself in these races. And when I've won races, it's quite underwhelming, which is odd because I think some people thrive on it and have to win. And whenever I've won, well, to be fair, I win stupid long races which take bloody weeks. So whenever I've won one, I think I've been so relieved to stop. Maybe I should have been like a sprinter or something, so you get to sort of cross the line full of adrenaline and wave your arms around. But
well, it's strange because
that's never been a thing for me.
I was reading about you, arriving after like 3 hours sleep, and you've been running off fumes for a long time. So I can imagine when you get to the finish, you're just kind of, it's just whoa, it's just a weird feeling.
Yeah, well, it's a mix of relief and disappointment because, well, I think I've realised that the big one for me was, I mean, we're skipping forward to like 2015. So what's that? Like nearly 20 years after I started racing.
Okay.
When I first did the TCR, when I won the TCR in 2015, which it wasn't quite as big as it is now, but it was still kind of, it was just at the turning point when it was getting mainstream. And
so
I remember
you did one
it.
you did one in 2014. You came second, right? And then you did this one, and then you
Yeah.
came first.
Yeah. So for me, the motivation there was, excuse me, the motivation there was, like I just knew I cocked up in 2014.
Okay.
I knew I wasted so much time. You know, I had sort of emotional highs and lows and a massive roller coaster, and I just knew that I could do it better. And I knew that if I did it better, having come second, I mean, I wasn't a close second. I think it was like 24 hours, maybe even more. But in my head, I could add up that lost time. And I was like, well, actually, I know I can be pretty close to first. So going back in 2015, I think I was more satisfied in knowing I did a really solid run. And I did make a few mistakes and have a few issues. But then when you're racing for 10 days, you're going to cock up at some point. But I kind of kept my cool and kept everything together and was just really consistent. So when I won, I was like, I don't know, when you spend 10 days doing something and then suddenly just stop. I mean, I guess it's like trying to stop smoking or something like that. Not quite that extreme, but
yeah,
people don't just stop generally, do they? And if they do, then there's kind of a bit, your body kind of has a bit of a kind of like a, I don't know, it gets angry at you. And when you just stop riding your bike, it's half kind of emotional disappointment because actually it's really quite a cool thing to do, riding across an entire continent or a country or, you know, whatever it happens to be. And then you're really knackered, so you're actually quite glad to stop. And then I kind of won it, and everyone was like quite, well, at the time, I think everyone was more worried about that than I was, to be honest. Obviously, since then, I'm obviously quite proud of that.
Well, I think it's a massive thing. I mean, because for people that don't know a little about the race, like the Transcontinental, like talk a little bit through it and kind of, I guess the size of the race and what it entails. Because you're saying you're winning, but well, I mean, people don't know, you know, that you could be winning anything, but it's a real, you know,
well, we've kind of fast forwarded quite a lot. I mean, we've kind of jumped to the end of the podcast, haven't we? We've gone from me coming last as a juvenile, doing like an hour, or not even that, to kind of 20 years later. So essentially, the Transcontinental race depends on what you want to call it. It's kind of changing. It's a discipline that's kind of evolving almost yearly at the moment. Some people call it ultra racing, other it's kind of bikepacking racing, and it's a race from across the continent. The clue's in the name, really, across Europe. So normally it starts somewhere in the north of Europe, the north kind of west corner of Europe, normally Belgium or France sometimes, and then finishes in southeast. So when I did it, early days, it started in London. So the two I finished started on London Bridge. Actually, no, that's a lie. The first one started on London Bridge. The second one in 2015 started in Gerardsbergen in Belgium.
Okay.
And then they both finished in Istanbul. But yeah, riding into Istanbul is a bit nuts. So the finishes kind of changed various places. So now there's kind of floating finishes and starts, but generally it's kind of basically riding across the continent. Normally about 2,000 miles or so. The one I did was particularly long, 2,600. And on the way, there's normally 3, sometimes 4 checkpoints that you have to go through. And then you kind of plot your own route in between them. And the idea is that, well, it's a race, isn't it? So first one there wins.
So does it change the nature of the journey, it being a race? I mean, are you still taking things in? I mean, are you being really reflective as you go past, or is it sort of head down?
I think it depends who you are. I mean, I think some people are racers out and out, and anything they do in life is going to be a race. For me, I mean, I quite like just seeing the world go by, to be honest. And it's not like you're sprinting for the finish line in the Tour de France, because you do that, you're not going to get to the finish because you'll be knackered. You know, although you're racing, it's more about being consistent. So essentially, it's about consistency on this kind of racing. Like your speed kind of, you get to a point when you can't really go any faster, you don't really go any slower. And that point is normally probably 3 or 4 days in, I reckon, generally speaking, depending on who you are. And I think essentially your body gets to the point where it realizes what's going on, and essentially just starts, burning fat, sort of over carbohydrates. Whereas most shorter races, obviously you can have the energy gels and this and that and the other, but you can't ever kind of really fully fuel for these kind of events. So essentially you're kind of surviving and just keeping moving. And by, say, the quickest way or the easiest way to go faster in one of these events is just not stop. So that means sleeping less. So you're sleeping like 3-4 hours, whatever you can get away with. You're not running into a shop, but you're stopping at a shop. And, if you spend 20 minutes at a shop versus someone who stays 10 minutes at a shop, that's 10 minutes. And do that 3 times a day. That's half an hour a day over, 7, 8, 9, 10 days. It soon adds up. So it's all about just being consistent and managing that level. And it turns out, well, I kind of seem to be all right at it. Well, certainly have been. Although I think the game is changing somewhat as sports do quite often. They get more popular, more people come into it. There's a bigger, pool of talent, I guess, and faster people turn up and soon learn how to do these things.
I mean, so back in 2014 and 15, was it still relatively new for people to be doing it? Is there a lot of people in the races or not?
Well, in 2014, there was one race that was probably the big one, the one kind of that, well, it's still going now, that people knew about. It was still underground and niche, which was a Tour Divide, which is in the USA, actually starts in Canada. And it's basically down the Rocky Mountains, north to south, starts in Banff and finishes in New Mexico at the Mexican border. So that was the race, really. And a guy called Mike Hall, who'd done that a couple of times. In 2013, he set a new record. He'd also set around the world record, and decided basically he wanted to try and replicate that in Europe and make it, quite accessible for people to go and have this amazing adventure. And that's where the transcontinental race came in. So the Tour Divide is quite underground. Like, there's no real sign up. You basically just turn up on the second Friday of June each year, 8 a.m. There's some kind of tracking system, which normally, if you've got your tracker and it's all sorted the day before, then you're doing quite well. Okay. Whereas kind of Mike started doing this I guess probably more organized, in the loosest sense of the word, but there was like a website, there was kind of a sign-on time roughly, I mean, it's very different now to when it was. When I first signed on in 2014, it was out the boot of Mike's car half an hour before the race, and he just gave me the tracker, and that was that. But now there's a whole kind of, more people, there's more risk, there's more danger, there's more chance of someone hurting themselves. Definitely more chance of someone getting in too deep and complaining about it. So organisers have to take kind of a bit more risk mitigation, I guess. So now sign on is like an hour and a half ordeal of checking your bike, checking your kit. Have you got this paperwork, that paperwork? But back in 2014, 15, you just turned up and basically rode to Istanbul, which was kind of cool, really.
I mean, it seems like a simple idea. I mean, so when you're there, in terms of like the kit you're bringing, I mean, you're trying to keep it minimal, but there was no sort of regulations of this thing. It's just sort of bring what you thought was best and off you go.
Yeah, it's very simple rules, really. I think there was 10 rules. I think it's things like riding the spirit of self-sufficiency. So you're not, basically you can use any commercially available service. So you couldn't have a crew following you in a car and giving you food and stuff. You could buy stuff from a shop, you can stay in a hotel, but you can't have like a support crew. And that, well, to be honest, that's the main rule. Don't be an idiot. Obviously there's probably more structure now, but there's no kind of governing body as such. But that was kind of the transcontinental race was kind of a blueprint for a lot of other races. And now there's almost weekly races in the summer now. Every country seems to have its own race. There's a couple of kind of long cross-continental races, but each organizer kind of makes their own rules, but they're all very similar. It's self-sufficiency, follow the route, or go through the checkpoints and make your own route. And basically just don't be an idiot. That's kind of it, really, which is quite nice and refreshing in a lot of senses.
Because it's interesting, the idea of like, you're doing cycling racing when you're younger, but racing and this idea of sort of like self-sufficient adventure, having a little bivvy or sleeping out under the stars or something, is almost a different thing as well. Like it's another skill, or is that just something you did? You just raced and you just kind of winged it until it happened.
Well, for me, the transcontinental race was probably my gateway to adventure. So I'd always seen like people go around the world and read all the books, like people like Alistair Humphreys, Mark Beaumont. He was probably one of the first guys to kind of document it in the early days of kind of easy videoing and stuff like that. And I'd always kind of wanted to do it, but at the time it was always like big silly touring bikes with like these big butterfly handlebars and like two panniers on the front and two big panniers on the back. And to be honest, it just looked a bit rubbish. Although I like the thought of it. But then when Mike rode around the world, he did it on, if you said bikepacking now, you probably wouldn't think of big panniers. You'd think of like a sleek bike, probably with drop bars and like a frame bag and maybe a little bar roll and a cool tail pack. And Mike was one of the first people to do that. And I remember just watching him do the round the world, which probably would have been 2012, I think. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. That's the way to ride your bike around the world and, go bicycle touring. So it kind of opened my eyes up a bit. And then, but I still hadn't really actually done anything like that. I was still slogging around. So in between, from being a juvenile racer to transcontinental, I kind of had this steady development of racing. So I did cross country and then like the mountain bike and then sort of the marathon style thing, which is kind of 2 to 3 hours, and stage races, which could be sort of I did the Cape Epic, which is 8 days, and also 24-hour mountain bike racing, which was going through a bit of a phase.
Okay.
So I was doing all these, but then after a while, you kind of, I think it gave me a very good base of knowledge about myself and pushing the kind of the limits in an endurance sense. What to eat and what happens when you don't sleep for 24 hours and your mind goes weird through the middle of the night and things like that. And even just traveling a bit within a stage race or racing 8 days back to back. And I think physically I probably understood what I was doing probably more than others at the time, but I still hadn't actually done the kind of the bike packing thing. So yeah, I just ran out of excuses when TCR came along. I kind of knew Mike. He did the 24-hour races and obviously the British guy. So kind of knew him to speak to and stuff like that. So I was like, well, if Mike's put it on, must be all right. So I should do it. And I did. And actually, that first TCR in 2014 just opened my eyes up because I was scared. Like I hadn't the previous September. The first TCR was 2013, and I didn't quite enter it. I was too scared. And then I dot watched it. So all the races carry a tracker, and most events have a website, basically a big map, and the dots. Each rider is like got their number on a little dot, which kind of progresses across the map. So dot watching seems to have become a sport within itself nowadays, as well as the actual racing. But I dot watched the first TCR in 2013, and yeah, that finished, and then I basically brought the bike back in bags and booked a one-way flight to Slovenia, and then just to see if I could ride home. And I could, and I thought I knew it all. And then I did the TCR in 2014 and soon found out I didn't.
So what was the
that
dividing
was
knowledge?
a steep learning curve.
What did you have to get on board in that 2014 race?
Well, it's just pushing yourself that far for that long. You know, you don't want to waste a minute a day. You're sleeping 3 hours a day, and in theory, it's easy to do. And I think a lot of people find this out, and you see it in races now when people are kind of maybe quite fit, and then they come into a race and they're giving it the big talk, and then you just think, I don't know, you might find out the hard way here. And I certainly found out the hard way in 2014. Just things start hurting that you never knew could hurt, and your mind does weird things. You know, I was almost like on an emotional roller coaster. I could be literally hysterically happy 1 minute, and then 10 minutes later, literally crying down the phone to my mum because I just wanted to get out of there. And I reckon had I had a smartphone in 2013, I probably wouldn't have finished that race. Or 2014, sorry. I probably wouldn't have finished that race because I would have actually known where I was and probably would have found some transport home. But I was a bit slow to adopt, so I had to carry on.
Yeah, I mean, it's good. Maybe it's good that you didn't have the option, you know.
Yeah, well, it was. In hindsight, if I'd have had the option to get to a train station or an airport or something like that, I probably would have. There was moments in 2014 I would have quit, but I didn't. And when you sat there, I remember one morning in Italy, I just had I went through the Alps, and this is where it started falling apart a little bit. And it rained a lot, and I must have had some slight imbalance, and my ankle was just massively when you get tendonitis and your ankle just really thick and swollen, and I couldn't bend it. And I just remember getting through the mountains, sitting in the north of Italy in the Po Valley on a little low wall outside a factory, and just sitting there thinking, oh, how do I get out of this? And then I couldn't figure out how to get out of it. So I was like, oh, well, I sat there for about 10 minutes and I thought, what am I going to do? Well, I better carry on because I've got nothing better to do. And then, I ate some food, and then the sun came up, and then suddenly my muscles warmed up and my ankle warmed up. I was like, oh, it doesn't feel so bad now. So I just carried on. And there was a few times, that happened. I snapped a gear cable in Croatia, and it was just I had a meltdown. I was feeling good, really strong. I kind of got over the tendonitis, feeling good about myself in a new country, never been to Croatia before, riding down the coast, beautiful sunshine. Then about 11 o'clock at night, went to change gear, just snapped. So I went from feeling incredible to just down in the dumps. I just didn't know what to do with myself. And then I think in the end I slept somewhere, just in a bivvy bag, which again is just, it's not great, to be fair, especially in Croatia in the middle of August when you're sweating inside it. But in the morning I kind of figured out, well, I can probably, single speed some way here. So if you screw the screw in the rear mech, you can push the mech up, and I think I got about 3 or 4 gears up. So I had the 2 chainrings at the front and that gear at the back. So I was like, well, I mean, I've got no other option to quit right now. There's no buses, there's no public transport. There's one road down the coast, and I'm in the most remote section of that road. So I've kind of got to carry on. So again, it forced my hand. And then I remember crossing to Montenegro, and literally the first shop I came across was a hardware store with a big bunch of cables hanging outside it. I was like, well, it's a bit of a sign, isn't it? So I mended my bike, put a new gear cable in, which took bloody ages, and then carried on. And kind of by that point, I was probably naive to the world a bit. like probably most people who live in a nice, comfortable Western society are, that you think you're going to cross into somewhere like Albania and it's just going to be terrible. But actually, I loved it. It was one of my favourite places. It's just the people were open and friendly, and Western societies are quite closed up. Everyone's a stranger, but there, kind of, you're never a stranger. Everyone's like, communities are closer. And I just really enjoyed that kind of that feeling. And then halfway through the mountains there, I just snapped the gear cable. But something had changed in my head then. Like, the gear cable snapped again, and I just knew. I got off my bike, screwed the rear mech in as far as it could. I think I had like a 16 cog at the back and like a 52 and a 39 or something at the front. I was like, right, well, I'm going to ride to Istanbul now. I've got 2 gears. So I rode the last 500 miles basically single speed. But that was kind of like, that was a big learning lesson. It kind of, something clicked in my head at that point. So I kind of, the problem wasn't a problem anymore. Quite often problems are problems because you make them a problem in your head. But when you step back, they're actually not so bad. And often it takes you not having a choice to resolve it, because what else are you going to do? No one's going to come and help you. So I kind of trudged on to Istanbul, ran out of battery and this and that and the other, and it's a disaster, but I somehow made it to the finish. Like, again, I just was happy to finish. I didn't realise that I was actually second in 2014 until the third place turned up. I thought he'd turned up already. He was already in a hotel, having a shower, and my head was all over the shop. But then, afterwards, you kind of, when you reflect on it, you think, well, this was a mistake I made there. I made this mistake there, that mistake there, and that cost me like 5 hours, and that cost me an hour. That's half an hour. And then in your head, I was almost like adding up these mistakes I made, and then working out why I made the mistakes, and kind of trying to connect like things together. Like, oh, I'm really hungry. Oh, I feel really sad now. And I'm really tired on my bike. So, well, there's probably a connection in there somewhere. And then, funnily enough, when you eat like 3 croissants or drink a can of Coke or something, you suddenly feel really happy and you've got loads of energy. So, it's basically fueling, isn't it? So I think I managed to kind of post-race connect the dots a bit in my mind. And also I just love the traveling experience. So yeah, I kind of basically quit my job quite soon after that and went traveling, which was quite cool.
Where did you go? Did you go on the bike or?
Yeah, I flew to Hanoi, because I mean, again, I'd never really been outside of Europe or Canada, but that kind of experience in Eastern Europe, kind of Albania, Montenegro, Macedonia, Bulgaria, and then into Turkey, in Istanbul. Well, just about into Turkey, not far. I don't know. I just remember there's a certain point where kind of the Christian faith changes into like a predominantly Muslim faith.
Okay.
And I don't know, just there's something about it. It's different when you hear like the call to prayer in the morning from the mosques. You just think, I don't know, just that sound is just like adventure for me, because you're going somewhere different. You're not close to home.
Something so other,
And I
something
just
you're
love
not
that.
used to.
And yeah, exactly. It just tells you, it's a cue that you're somewhere different. So I kind of wanted to experience that a bit. So I decided to go to Southeast Asia. So I left just after Christmas. I think I must have got to Hanoi just before New Year. And essentially I rode from Hanoi across the north of Vietnam into Laos, did a bit of kind of a loop around Thailand, and then I went to New Zealand via Australia for a week or so, and then I rode all the way down New Zealand.
Cool.
So that was into early 2015. So thankfully I was quite fit by the time the transcontinental race came along in mid 2015, and I kind of knew that, I don't know, I was quite confident. I knew that I was going to win it, because you never know these things, so much can happen. But I knew that I knew how to win it, if you know what I mean. So I knew that if I got everything right, I'd be right up there. And then the rest of it is, well, not say luck, because I believe you kind of make your own luck, but but there was a certain amount of I knew what I could control and what I couldn't, put it that way. And I knew if I controlled the things that I could control, i.e. me, then in theory I could be very close. And as it turned out, I just stuck to my own game the whole race, and I didn't lead it for quite a while. I didn't lead it till Croatia, and it was quite a long way around that way. We went all the way from Belgium back down to Mont Ventoux in sort of Provence, southern France, then back across the Alps, into the Po Valley, all the way across Croatia. So it would have been Slovenia, then Croatia, then back across to Montenegro, Kotor Bay on the Adriatic, and then into Albania. And that then from there on, I took exactly the same route as I did in 2014. So I kind of knew what was coming. Although I think I was a bit naive in 2014 because some of the roads I took were terrifying. I also knew what was coming and was terrified before I even got there.
Which roads are the worst? What, coming into Turkey and stuff, or all the way through?
No, Turkey's all right actually because it's a big motorway, and actually, believe it or not, motorways are one of the better places. It's not like you're riding around the M25. It's in the UK. You're talking like a big road with a big hard shoulder, so all the traffic's clear of you. It's just like the trunk roads going across Bulgaria, where they're like all the trucks are going and everything's going. The surface is terrible, and they're as wide as two trucks, and there's two trucks and you on the road, and that's when it gets a little bit hairy. But the TCR is, that was early days. It was developing. The TCR now has more knowledge for a start, but they're essentially trying to they put in band roads, so they're trying to force you off those big roads for safety reasons, because it's a percentage game really. The more people, if you've got 1,000 people riding down a dangerous road, the chances of someone getting hit are just higher, and no one needs that, because obviously there has been a few deaths, mainly Mike Hall, the founder of TCR, and he got killed racing in Australia, on probably one of the emptiest roads, but stuff can happen. Yeah. So you have to try and control it the best you can.
Does that ever worry these things, or it's just part of it? You just accept it?
Well, obviously it's more of a consideration now, but yeah, I'm quite a lot older now as well, because some of those roads, what was I can't remember how old I was in 2014. You just don't know what you're going into. Naivety sometimes is good for you, but now I'm very conscious. But I think you see generally, I mean, the Transcontinental is still there as a race, and it's as popular as ever. There are more kind of restrictions on the roads you can take for very good reason, i.e., not going down massive highways with loads of traffic. But generally, a lot of newer events are kind of more off-road orientated, or, well, I'll use the term gravel because that seems to be the word for in fashion at the moment. So basically dirt roads and smaller roads and things like that. And because it's getting more popular, there's more people doing it, so the events are growing. But a lot of the events now tend to be loops, or kind of a slightly more controlled environment. And because there's more sponsorship, more people doing it, there's more sort of funding in the races, so you can have people in cars, on standby within the race and things like that, which is another arguing point. Some people think it should be just out there solo. Other people think there should be some kind of like control in it, but I guess that's what you get in a growing sport.
Yeah, it seems because that element of that adventure, you don't want to lose that by having too much control over it, because there's so many things that can go wrong. I mean, I was actually reading what you had about a bee flew in your ear, and then you got hit by a bat, and all sorts of like weird things happening. Yeah. You can't account for.
I read that hunt blog.
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, in life, we kind of it's all very safe and controlled, and we've got rules about this and that and the other. And actually, it's quite boring,
Yeah.
compared to how you could live. And I think when you travel, I think that's what opened my eyes, like traveling in Eastern Europe. I've just come back from Morocco. I went for 10 days just touring, and life's different there. There's not so much. So the rules aren't so strict because they're almost still more on the basic kind of human survival instincts end of the spectrum, rather than our luxury lives that we get to spend an evening talking about a podcast which someone's going to listen to on their fancy phone tomorrow. They don't have that.
Exactly. Yeah.
In certain areas. In the high Atlas, I went through some of those towns, and I was talking to one guy, and he said, "Yeah, we're normally snowed off up here, for 3 months, and there's towns in the middle there which should just be isolated for all of winter. There's no phone reception, and it's a whole different world." And I think doing these races really opened my eyes to that travel aspect. I think it keeps you grounded in a lot of respects. It's a luxury. It's a bit of a funny one, isn't it? It's a luxury that you can just go and experience people in not luxury. I don't know if it really makes much sense when you think about it like that, but
yeah, you reflect your own luxury by seeing other people not having luxury. It's a weird one, yeah.
Yeah, but that's the nice thing about touring on a bike, because in most countries in the world, if you're riding a bike, it's because you can't afford a motorbike. For example, Africa, you're kind of you're down a level. You're not just like a rich guy in a big car because it's a show of wealth, which it is in certain countries. When even in the UK, if you've got loads of money, most people tend to have some big fancy car, and drive like idiots because they can, because they've got a big fancy car. But you get countries like, for example, I spent a bit of time in Africa, in Rwanda, places like that. A bike is just the standard way of moving around. And then you sort of, once you maybe get a bit older and you can afford a moped or a motorbike, then that's what you go for. And not very many people have cars. So by default, when you're traveling in countries like this, if you turn up on a bicycle, it kind of, I don't know, it kind of makes you more human. They can relate. A lot of people can relate to it a lot easier.
Yeah.
Kind of like the opposite to the UK, when people just think you're a bit of an idiot because you're not driving a car. Like the rest of the world is, if you're on a bike, then you're kind of more normal.
Well, it's something that they can relate to, and they can actually see you as well. And I guess it's also, you're at a speed that you can stop and engage with these people.
Exactly. I think touring on a bike is just the perfect speed. And even these races, like the transcontinental race, yeah, you're racing in inverted commas, but like I said earlier, you're not going flat out like a time trial or the Tour de France. It's not the Olympics. You're just riding your bike all day and not stopping very much. But the amount of places I've been back to that I've discovered in races. So I've done a tour down Croatia, through Albania. I think I've been to Albania 3 times, twice on the TCR, and then once again just touring, because I quite like to go a bit slower and enjoy it. And you see a lot in a short period of time. So in those 10 days, let's go for 2015, or maybe no, 2014, because that was my eye-opening experience. So I started in London, rode to France. The first checkpoint was in Paris, then rode across France. Where did we go then? Must have gone into, did we cross the Alps? Yeah, into Switzerland, then into Italy, then into Croatia, which for me was a new country. Montenegro, which again was a new country for me. I've already forgotten Slovenia. That was in there as well before Croatia. Then Bosnia, then Albania, then Macedonia, then Bulgaria, and then finished in Istanbul in Turkey. So that's like probably double the amount of countries I've ever seen in my life in 10 days.
Yeah.
Less than that, probably, I think it was 8 and a bit, 9 days, let's call it. So you see a lot. And because you're going, it's almost a perfect pace, because you see the gradual change and you feel the change. You feel the change in terrain. You can ride your bike up one mountain and then drop down the other side, and suddenly it's all different. And you can cross a made-up line on a map, i.e. a border, and it changes in an instant, like the way people act, the currency, the food, the smells. Like in summer in in kind of Southeast Europe, there's a distinct smell, which is it's mainly rotting rubbish in bins because it's they have the big communal kind of like bins on the edge of town. That's just one. It's one of those little cues for me that lets me know I'm kind of getting to that part. And then there's the things like the sounds, like I was saying, like the mosques, the call to prayer in the morning and stuff. And you don't get that same transition when you just jump on a flight in, I don't know, London somewhere and just get off the other side of the world. You're just there suddenly. But when it's gradual, I think you kind of I know it just happens. And sometimes you realise and it's quite distinct, and other times you kind of suddenly think, oh yeah, it's changed. Why has it changed? And then you figure it out. And equally, you kind of end up, people change in the way they act, and you kind of, I think you kind of adapt with them a bit more.
Okay.
So I think basically, like bike touring is probably my favourite thing over the racing, but the racing is kind of bike touring on steroids.
So I mean,
you soon learn what you do like, where you do like, where you don't.
Is there like a distinct difference? I mean, is it just the speed? I mean, do you allow yourself more luxuries, or do you just stick with the same plan and then you just let yourself go a bit slower?
When I'm touring?
Yeah, I mean, are you bringing the same stuff with you? Are you kind of like, you're still bivvying along, or do you stay in hostels and stuff? Does it change when you tour, or is it just the speed that changes, do you think?
To be honest, I think the speed is probably about the same as racing. Probably faster,
really?
actually,
Okay.
because you're fresher and you eat more. Because when you think about it, when you're racing, you're essentially trying to ride 17, 18 hours a day, which is quite tiring. But when I go touring, if I ride all day, it's like 7, 8, 9 hours. So, you're almost riding half the amount of time. So you're not going to get, in theory, as tired. And then you're sleeping all night. And for me, a perfect tour is, I'd probably just have the same kit as I would have for racing, and then a set of spare clothes, and I'd stay in like a little hostel or a hotel every night. That's my favourite way, because you can go quite light and fast, and you've got a good bed every night. Either that, or I'd try and take a tent. So I did a ride last summer. I got a one-way flight to Stavanger in Norway and cycled back to the UK. And that was a great trip, apart from the incessant headwind the whole way home. But I took a tent with me, and that was great. Like in the middle of summer, like when the weather's good, like just camping out and jumping in lakes and stuff like that is just the best. But yeah, it's nice to be self-sufficient. But when I was in Morocco in January, I took a tent with me. I slept in it once, but that was mainly because I felt I had to, because I carried it with me, because it was bloody cold most of the time. So camping kind of lost its appeal.
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, so is there any place in particular that's been like your favorite? I mean, it's a hard thing to say, because it sounds like you've kind of jumped all over. You kind of like, oh, this is really interesting, that's really interesting, and I guess there's a bit of a distinction between the racing and the touring. But even touring, you've been sort of going around. I mean, is there many places left for you?
I've never been to South America,
Okay.
which is quite a big one. So yeah, I would like to at some point. But I feel like it's one of those places you kind of have to do it justice, and you can't just go for a week, because it's quite a big continent. So I think at some point I'd love to do a big kind of, maybe there'll be a race there, that does a big kind of a 2,000-mile stretch or something like that. Again, that'd be a good way to see a load of it quickly, and then maybe narrow down where to spend more time, or maybe just do like a multi-month tour, and just take my time. So that'd be good. And I've never been to Central Asia either. So, I'm doing the Silk Road Mountain Race this August, hopefully. So that should, that's in Kyrgyzstan. So
Okay.
that will kind of pique my interest. It's piqued my interest, and it will tick that box a little bit. And again, it's kind of a bit of a toe in the water. I do like these races, but winning them just not the be all and the end all for me. It's good, and don't get me wrong, I've won a few, and it is pretty cool. But the touring is just the best. When you're on your own time scale, you're just kind of like floating through these places, and you're kind of, well, you're just, I don't know, it's just I guess it's probably escapism at its finest, isn't it? And yeah, it's just, I quite enjoy seeing the world.
Is that like something you think will ever change? I mean, do you come back and sort of lament being back at home, or do you find it equally like, you know, you're happy where you are now, or are you eager to like be back on the road?
Well, yeah, I wasn't ready to come home from Morocco, but I remember when I was kind of like at university, like I didn't really enjoy university that much, but it was kind of, I was of the generation where literally everyone went to university, and maybe it wasn't for me in the grand scheme of things. Maybe I should have just gone traveling, but I didn't do it for whatever reason, and I kind of felt maybe I missed out a bit. And then I started getting these like nagging desire to go traveling after uni, and I kind of did, but not like the whole gap year type thing. I did a few bike races because that's what I knew. I think I did a stage race in Canada called BC Bike Race, which is great. Basically, rode all like the amazing mountain bike single track in around Vancouver and Squamish and Whistler and Vancouver Island. But it was all, I don't know, traveling and doing a bike race where you're basically in a circus is not quite the same as real travel. And it took me till doing the TCR to really properly do that. But I kind of said to myself when I left uni, like, oh, well, you better start doing all this stuff now, because when you get to 30, you'll have to grow up and all that stuff. So now I'm trying to say that now to myself every year, and I'm 34. So I think I've just accepted it's not going to change.
It's quite nice in a way, though.
You just can't change who you are, can you?
Mm.
We've got a mega lag here somewhere. Sorry.
There's a massive lag the whole way through, but it's fine because I'm enjoying the stories. I mean, so what happens now? I mean, do you race full time? I mean, you class yourself as a racer? Can you introduce yourself as that, or do you have to do other stuff in the background?
I don't know, because it's a funny one, isn't it? Because in my eyes, a professional cyclist, in inverted commas, that's their job. They wake up and their sole mission in life is to win some kind of medal, some kind of race, and they train and then sit in their ass and have a massage and all this stuff, and that's all they do. But I kind of like, I don't think I like bike riding is kind of my job, but I wouldn't say I'm professional in that sense. It just, like, for me in my head, that's not who I am. So I do a lot of other bits and bobs as well, and I am sponsored, and I do get paid to do these things. But I think it's more than, like, now there's, it's not all about winning races. Obviously, it's really good because if you're sponsored, you get loads of coverage and stuff. But I'm thinking, like, now it's more about kind of engaging with kind of people as well, because that's equally as important for a sponsor. Because actually, a lot of people doing these events, they're not going to win them. Especially now when the fields are getting so competitive. All the ex-pros who are not quite good enough to be pro, but are way better than the average people, are kind of gravitating towards these things because they can win them, which means maybe people like me who could win them a few years ago are getting lower down the pecking order, and the opportunities are slimmer. But there's a whole raft of people coming from the bottom up, who maybe have got into cycling in the last 3 or 4 years and don't want to do a road race, and they don't want to go on a cycling club run, and they kind of want that bit of adventure. And actually, a bike packing event, whether it's a competitive race or not, is quite a good way to get into it. But then there's lots of stuff involved, like, what kit do I use and how do I do it and where do I go and all these things. So actually, I think as a kind of, well, I hate the word ambassador because it just sounds naff, but that kind of thing, if you're doing that for a brand, you're kind of promoting the brand, because it's kind of, well, it's consumerism, isn't it? Unfortunately, it's the world we live in. But you kind of, they're not necessarily going to be inspired by you just standing on a podium waving your arms in the air with a big medal. Actually, by seeing you go out and do something cool, that is the inspiration. And then by answering questions about, what you're using or how you did it or this or that or the other, I think that's equally as valuable, if not more so nowadays. So I'm trying to do a bit more of that. Obviously, YouTube's quite big nowadays, so it's quite easy just to film stuff and put it out. And I've been doing it for a while, but I'm trying to make a more concerted effort on that. So I film my little trips in Morocco, and I've kind of done it sporadically over the years, but I kind of need to make a bit more of a concerted effort because, well, there's an audience for it. And to be honest, I get annoyed when I see people who've been riding a bike for 6 months pretending they're massive experts on the internet. And I kind of think, well, I've been doing it for 30 years almost, 25 years. I should probably do that because I've, well, maybe not an expert, but at least I've made a few mistakes.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to do that. And then I do a bit of...
Sorry, I got you.
Yeah.
I got you on the lag. I was just thinking it's quite nice that it's almost demystifying, because when you look at someone on a podium and then you're someone new wanting to get into this and give it a try, and you talk about all the kit and all of the things that go into it. It's just like, oh, I'm here and they're all the way up here, and it just seems like a bridge that I can never gap. I could, you know what I mean? So I could never sort of like, I could never get there. But if you can demystify it a little bit, I think it makes such a difference to people, and I think that's where we are now, where we can do that. It doesn't have to be sort of this elite thing.
Yeah, and it's not. And the nice thing is that elite guys are coming into this bikepacking stuff and think they're elite. And I guess there's probably a bit more. Certainly male side of elite sports, a bit more macho and ego, and you just can't hide in these events, and that's a really nice thing. I find it weird. For example, when I'm on TCR, everyone's like, "Oh, wow, that's amazing! You won this event. It took you 10 days or just under 10 days, and it was amazing." And I think, well, yeah, but I won it. What about all the poor other people who are still bloody out there riding, and they're going to be taking 20 days to do the same distance? I mean, actually, it's easier to do it quicker in that sense. So I think it's a big leveler because you just know what everyone's been through. It's not like you're doing a cyclocross race where everyone's going to race for an hour, regardless of whether you're first or last. If you're taking 3 weeks to ride across Europe and the winner's taking 10 days, that's harder, I can assure you. And so when I did GB Duro when was it, in the pandemic, 2020, again, that was similar because we weren't allowed to stop anywhere. We had to carry all our supplies for the whole race because there was a bit of it was kind of not cool at that point just to kind of travel around and not wash your hands and go in shops in different places. And so basically the organizer said you had to carry all your food for the race. So we did, and I had 8 days worth of food. So I basically had to finish it in 8 days, and I did, which was great, and I won it. And again, everyone's like, "Oh my god, that was amazing! You didn't eat, you didn't buy anything or go inside or use a toilet for 8 days." And I'm like, yeah, but there was a woman there, and she took, how long did she take? 20 days, and she did it in the same way. Carrying all her food, drinking out streams for, the best part of 3 weeks, 2.5, 3 weeks, going to the loo outside, not having a shower. So actually, I mean, what's the real win there? I would not want to have been out any longer in that because I was falling to pieces by the end of it. So to do it for another week, I mean, it's kind of like the real winner, really, isn't it? Which is,
yeah,
it's the nice thing about these super long endurance events. It's a leveler because you know full well that you're almost on the same level. I mean, almost. I felt if I had a chat with, I think her name was Anita. If I had a chat with her, I'd probably feel like I was probably a lesser kind of person for taking the quick option and getting it finished early.
Do you find that these people you can almost just instantly relate to because you've had the same experience?
Oh yeah, it's I think I've got some quite sort of close friends from me things, and there's also people that I've literally spent a day with on a race, but you feel like you know them, like deeply because you're kind of both tired. You can't hide anything. You can't put your poker face on when you're like a week in and you've not slept and you're hungry. Your real personality comes out, and you talk about probably you're more open with your probably emotions and things like that. So I think you really can judge people really quite well. And I guess, well, I can't say for sure, but you see people who've sort of, been in the military and things like that. There's these quite deep bonds from, I guess, adversity. It's not obviously not quite the same thing, but I do think that doing these things really does strengthen bonds. And even in races where you're racing someone and you never actually see them, but you think about them all, for a whole week because they're close, and from the tracker they're there, and you almost know exactly what they're doing at all times. It's amazing how well, you're thinking about what they're going to do and try and get inside their head. It's amazing how well you can get to know someone without actually meeting them or not knowing them properly.
So you're there thinking, I know this person, that this is how long they spent eating, and this is how long they sleep for, and stuff like that. That's quite a strange place to be, like almost monitoring someone's habits.
It is. Yeah, and the worst thing as well is that you forget that some websites got your dot on and your habits everywhere, and then loads of random people know exactly what you're doing all the time, and then they tell you about what you've been doing, and you're like, was I? How do you know that? That's really odd.
It's funny. I had a little tracker, like when I went touring last year, and I remember making lots of mistakes, like going the wrong way, and I'd be going the wrong way, and before I noticed, people started messaging me. Like people are online, like,
Yeah.
Where are you going? You're going the wrong way. Turn back. It's kind of embarrassing in a way, but it's quite fun.
Yeah, it's just odd. And then people find you, in random places, and you're like, oh, this is really weird. I'm being stalked. But I guess it's kind of what you sign up for, and it's part of it. Yeah, like weird times of the night and things like that, and in places you really don't expect them. Normally when you're in a foul mood as well, so you have to try and be
happy. Did you have any weird encounters, or people turning up from far away to come see
you? I must have at some point. I don't know. There's always someone. I mean, dot watching is kind of it's getting like a bigger thing. I mean, it's almost like a spectator sport, but really kind of, it's not like watching a football match on the telly. It kind of gets inside you, and you can just check your phone every 10 minutes. I think it's really addictive. So more and more people getting into it. And then if you're suddenly running by their house, they just come out, which is odd. And they'll be checking their phone all the time. So even if it's 3 a.m. and tipping it down with rain, they'll be there. So yeah, plenty of little things like that.
It's just to get a glimpse. I remember a guy who used to tell me that every day he'd have his lunch break and work, and he would just check in where I was, and it became part of his daily routine. And it just made me feel quite happy in a way. Like this guy is just waiting, and eventually I ended up staying with him, and I'd be on the road for 3 months. So he'd been watching right from the start, and 3 months in, I stayed with him, and he'd followed this whole journey and had this real connection with what I'd done. And it was weird because he knew me so well, and he obviously seen the stuff that I was putting out on social media, and he was like, oh yeah, he could just kind of talk to me as if he already knew me and I'd never met him. Weird, really weird.
Yeah, I totally get that. And yeah, it's odd, isn't it? Especially when you're just sort of traveling as well. It happens quite a lot. Not even when you've got a tracker, but just when you're kind of meet people and they've done a journey when they were younger or something, and they can relate to it. I think it goes back to that thing I was saying about traveling on a bike. Quite a lot of people have done it, and bike packing is, well, it's a very new thing in the name, but people have been touring on bikes for years and years and years and years. It's just been, made a bit more modern and dressed up a little bit. So there's always the old boy that's kind of rode around the world in his 20s, and now he's 50, and he meets another person on a bike, and he wants to talk all about your bike and tell you about his trip from back in the day, and wants to buy you lunch, and that's nice, isn't it? Let's face it, it's kind of cool, and that's the thing. Bikes just kind of bring people together a little bit. Whether it is kind of someone like that, or whether in Africa, in Rwanda, racing there, and the boys on taxi bikes and carrying big bundles of bananas. They want to race you on their bikes because you're on a bike. It's just kind of like the leveler, isn't it? It's yeah, you might look slightly different and you might be wearing different clothes, but you're still on a bike. And a bike's a bike, isn't it? Really, it's a simple machine. Even the fanciest, aerodynamic carbon fiber contraptions that are racing the Tour, they're just, they're not much different from a big heavy bike in Rwanda that's used to carry, pails of water or milk or whatever. It's got two wheels, some pedals, a chain, and some tubes.
And there's nothing to stop them. You can jump on their bike and they can jump on yours. At the end of the day, like it's something that we can all understand. And I think what's really interesting is coming back, and you've been to these places and how like excited it makes people that you've been there. I've never been to somewhere like Croatia, but imagine you meet someone here and you say, oh, and you can mention a place that you've been through and you can relate to that person straight away.
Yeah, I mean, it depends what kind of holiday they've been on, mind you. When you say you've been to Benidorm, it's probably not quite quite what they had in mind. I stayed in Benidorm once, just while on that subject. It was just like, it was in January. I was cycling from Nice to Malaga because it's a good year to go touring because everything's just quiet. And I stayed in Benidorm in just like shittest hotel ever. And I just remember there was like, it was proper like scabby, and there was just like two sets of handprints up against the wall, like a set of big blokes' handprints and then a smaller set of women's handprints. I was like, oh god, maybe I'll sleep in my sleeping bag in this bed tonight.
It's funny because some places like that. I mean, I was, so Blackpool is sort of like a tourist destination, and probably what you would never consider as like a place you'd want to go on a tour. Like, if you want to go somewhere a bit wild, you're sleeping in a tent and stuff, not something you'd think about. But I remember being on the road for a long time, and I ended up coming through Blackpool, and the change was so refreshing that I really enjoyed it. Like I ate just like hot dogs and donuts and went on fairground rides, and I was just having this like wild experience because I'd been roughing it for long enough for that to be such a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's I know exactly what you mean, and maybe not quite in the same context, but when I first started doing these long trips, maybe not the TCR in 2014, but that the trip in the winter. So I was away from just after Christmas till probably early April, so 3 and a bit months, and that was the first time. I think I'd always had a lot of stuff, and I just got back and I was like, well, I've lived 3 months with one pair of trainers, a couple of pairs of pants, a couple of t-shirts, set shorts, set trousers, and the cycling kit. So you get back and you've got all this stuff, and you're like, well, why do I need it? It's like you say, it's like, it's not things that make you happy. It's those kind of weird experiences, or like, eating donuts or going on a merry-go-round. It's kind of, you just get back and kind of want to clear everything out and just stick with the basic kind of things, because actually you can get a lot of joy and happiness out of, something mundane almost. But when you've not had it for a while, it's so much better, isn't it? But we just get used to it. I guess maybe that's why I like going traveling in these weird places. Well, not weird, but more remote places, because probably when you get back home, you realize actually life's pretty damn good. You haven't really got much to complain about, and it probably makes life feel a bit easier. I've got a nice house and got a nice sofa to sit on, and don't actually need that stuff really, but I've got it. A lot of people in the world haven't got that, so it's yes, I guess it's refreshing. But again, a little odd, as I said earlier, rich enough to go and make myself feel poor and then come back to being rich. It's a bizarre way to live, really, isn't it?
you see it, and then you can come back to your nice sofa. It is a weird one. I mean, do you think it alters the way you are at home? Are you sort of like changing the way? I mean, do you not have any belongings at home, or are you relatively easygoing with it?
I've just got mainly bike stuff, if I'm honest, and camping stuff and stuff to go traveling with. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, you accumulate stuff, don't you? Whether you kind of, you have to make quite a conscious decision not to accumulate stuff. And when you're on a bike, you have no choice because you've got to carry it. When you've got a house, you can just think, oh, just put that there, and sort it out later, and then like 3 weeks later it's still there and you've not done anything with it, and it just stays there forever in its new home. But life is, we overcomplicate life a little bit. I think that's what you get when you go to these places. People have to kind of live, and living is not quite so easy. Whereas maybe in Europe and the more Western cultures, living is a bit easier. And then we find other things to be upset about and get depressed, and boring things like that. It's like, if life is a bit harder, you wouldn't have time to get depressed about things. So it's I don't know. It's I think we've got a lot of people take a lot of things for granted. So I do think it's important to go and see the world that maybe isn't quite as lucky as we are. I think it puts life in context a little bit.
What is the thing about, we've just got a surplus of time, and then you sort of worry, I don't want to do this and this and that. And I think for some people, it's just a case of they're just surviving, or not necessarily surviving, but like you said, they're fulfilling life. They're just working and trying to get through it. Whereas we've kind of got a situation where we're beyond that, which is as problematic as the other side sometimes.
Yeah. Or our lives are so complicated that we're working to pay for stuff we don't really need. I think that's the other thing as well. We don't have to overcomplicate things. I don't know. It's a funny one. I think it's hard to explain. I mean, without doing it, it's hard. It's not for everyone, mind you. Some people just like, don't want that kind of hardship. But for me personally, I think it's important, and I think I'll always probably want that and want to go and travel and see places. And then I think, it does make me more grateful when I'm back, back in the UK, and, when I've got other problems to deal with, they're not the worst problems in the world, are they? Like, my heating's really expensive. Well, I've got a house and I've got heating, so that's probably better than a lot of people that don't have a house and don't have heating. So, it's yeah, I think you get the point.
Do you think
that's what bike riding does for you?
Do you find life simpler on the road? Do you kind of enjoy that space? Do you feel it quite freeing, or do you think normal life is you find more complicated?
Yeah, I mean, when you're on the road, it's you're just going somewhere, aren't you? Maybe you know where you're going, maybe you don't. And on a bike, you're just pedaling. I really do. I think one of the reasons I like these races. I've said it to a few people. I kind of think we are basically animals, aren't we? Like we're kind of quite highly evolved. Well, we're from apes and cavemen and whatnot. And I always kind of get this thing in my head when you're doing one of these races. Like I just imagine that I'm a caveman, or we're cavemen, and it's like, what do we have to do today? Well, I've got to not get eaten by someone because I'm probably going to be chased. I need to find some food because I'll be hungry, and I've got to find somewhere to sleep. And that's probably the things I'm really kind of, really quite pressing today. And then you do a bike race like this and you think, oh, someone's chasing me on this little dot on the map, so I better keep on going. And then I'm really hungry, so I need some food. And then you get to the end of the day and like, right, I need to find somewhere to sleep. And I just think, well, actually, the reason it probably makes a lot of sense is because, like, it's just we're tapping into these basic primitive instincts. And I'd imagine that's probably why a lot of people do these kind of, like, not necessarily ultra cycling, running marathons probably, or these ultra running, or climbing up mountains, or just maybe just travel. It's I think it does tap into our basic human instincts that we're pre-programmed whether we like it or not. And I think they do probably influence the way we act in this modern world, but our bodies haven't quite caught up with the modern world. So actually, we are still quite simple. So sometimes just doing a simple task, maybe that's why people like repetitive. The repetitive wake up, go to work, have a sandwich at 12 o'clock, go home, have your dinner, watch telly, wake up. It's probably we're simple, and I think we need simple things. And riding a bike is a very simple thing to do. And I think combined with those kind of basic I think emotions or instincts that it kind of brings out. I don't know. It just makes a lot of sense to me, and you can probably tell I spent a lot of time riding my bike with not much else to think about. So I've made up these weird theories, but
No,
that's kind of, I don't know. That's why I think it kind of makes sense.
that's interesting. That idea of back to like hunter gatherer stage. You're moving, and it's just food, water, shelter. And for all of like the complex issues that you have in your head when you're in the modern world, you just go back to that. It's just the three simple things. And I think that's maybe what like you said, that we've been designed for a long time, and how nice it is to bring back your priorities to those things.
Yeah, it's really refreshing. And like going back to, I said about winning races and stuff, and specifically the transcontinental race. It's like you finish it, and suddenly everyone's excited that you won, and everyone wants a piece of you and wants to talk to you about this and that and the other. And actually, it's kind of suddenly life's very complicated again. When actually it had been quite nice for 10 days because you'd just been doing those basic things, and yeah, then everyone wants to like talk to you and ask you questions and what do you want, this or that, and like, oh, I don't know, I just want, when you've had a simple existence for 10 days, it's a shock to the system, and it felt more natural just riding my bike by myself, not getting hassled, maybe chatting to someone every now and again. And don't get me wrong, it is nice, but I think it's more natural doing the other things for me anyway, and that's the only way I've kind of, of explaining it. I think it is those natural kind of, I guess, almost prehistoric instincts.
So you've got all this time. So you've got you said, what was it, 15, 16 hours of riding in a race day, and you've got all this time just in your head. Do you have like crazy theories about things, or does it eventually just sort of become like meditation and it just disappears? There's not a lot going on, or are you constantly thinking?
I don't know. I think it depends on on who you are and what's going on. I think certainly probably when I first started doing them, I wasn't like quite settled now in life. Maybe I wasn't quite as settled then, and it gives you time to kind of figure things out and like maybe set your path. When you're kind of like, I think I had it when I left university, and I was like, well, it's not quite where I want to be going. So you kind of figure it out eventually. It's just growing up, isn't it? And then probably when you get late 20s, like think, oh bloody hell, I'm past 25 now. Now what's going to happen? And I think again that was probably a period where I found it. So you kind of end up daydreaming and thinking. Certainly when touring, problems kind of don't go away, but make more sense when you can just spend the day, I guess, daydreaming about it. But on the races, sometimes you're just so focused on the task in hand. I think you kind of have to be focused on the task in hand to do it well. Certainly I do, to do it well. Like time can just fly, and you can go for a whole day, and you think, well, where's that day gone? And I don't know where. I think I guess it's just concentrating on what's in front of you. Again, it's simplifying things, isn't it? It's like, where am I going right now, or in the next 10 minutes? How am I feeling? Am I hungry? Do I need some food? Yes, I do. No, I don't. Oh, I'm going to stop at this town. Or how long is the town? Or my favourite is like obviously cyclists for some reason, I guess because it's European sport, working kilometres. But because I live in England, I'm like, well, obviously it's all miles. And I'm really bad at maths, so it takes me ages to work out miles or kilometres into miles. So that probably passed half the time when I'm doing these races, just trying to figure out distances and times, like how long I'm going to do, how long is it going to take to get here and stuff like that. So there's always stuff going on in your head, but it's just kind of like the here and now rather than kind of all that other noise around the, that can really, well, I guess stress you out, for want of a better term. Like your biggest stress is like, how long is it going to be till I get my lunch, and what am I going to buy in the shop?
Sounds stressful.
Well, it can be. It can be. I mean, if you cock up the calculation to the next town, it takes an extra hour, and you run out of food. And then B, you get in your head you want a very specific item of food, and then you can't get it. That can be very stressful.
Do you get cravings for things? Do you get real cravings?
Yeah, sometimes. I know it's a weird one because sometimes you just get in the routine, I think by the end of TCRs, I'm just eating like baguettes or like bread and ham, and just I can survive on that. I think you can train your body to want it, so it kind of it's working. So you kind of just stick with it, and then sometimes there might be something specific. Mainly for me, like a fizzy drink, sometimes like a Fanta or something, or a Coke. But that's normally my body saying, hang on a minute, you've gone a bit too hard here, you need some sugar quick. So I think it's just your body kind of and your brain connecting it together, and you're like, oh, Fanta, that's got sugar in it. So that's definitely what I need right now. So yeah, it does happen. And then other times, I mean, like when I was training the other day, I just really wanted cheese on toast for some reason. Like I never have cheese on toast, but I knew I had a few slices of bread and some cheese at home, so that's what I had for lunch when I got back. Brilliant.
Maybe that's what you were missing. Somewhere your brain knew that had everything you needed to feel right.
Deficient in cheese.
Cool. I mean, it's pretty laggy. I think it's been a pretty good podcast. I don't know how much time you got, but I'm happy to bring it to an end if that's okay with you.
Yeah, fine. I mean, if there's anything else, I can answer a bit more, but it depends how you're feeling, really.
Is there anything else you'd like to talk about? Anything else that really... Now you've got the platform. I mean, we've got at least 5 listeners. So if there's anything else, you talk about being an ambassador. You talk about we were talking about bridging that gap, right? Is there anything that you would like to talk about?
Well, I think I've covered most of it. I mean, it's kind of it's hard to cover. Well, what was it, 20 years and kind of that whole change in kind of an hour, isn't it? But and to be honest, it's I think I've covered the core. But yeah, it's just kind of it's a balance, isn't it? I think like I say, I don't necessarily see myself as a professional racer. I have somewhat of a job, kind of. Well, a couple of days worth a week anyway, working for Hunt Bike Wheels, where I'm kind of essentially looking after the growing number of sponsored riders who are doing similar things. So yeah, it's a nice balance, and I think that's the key, really, isn't it? To balance the thing you love doing and the paying the bills bit, and hopefully everyone gets what they need out of it, and you don't just end up chasing kind of bills, which unfortunately everyone has.
So what's is there anything beyond now? Anything you're hopeful for? Is there anything like that's the next thing, or are you just kind of happy and settled, and when it comes, it comes?
Well, if I can carry on doing what I'm doing in a similar kind of way, I don't want to be the person like the pro athlete who just trains really hard 3 hours in the morning and then spends the rest of the day sat on the sofa, because to be honest, that sounds really boring. I'd love to be able to mix travel and racing, and the people that do sponsor me, I like to be really involved, trying to help develop products and things like that. Just be involved with it rather than just kind of like, I'm going to take your money and wear your logo on my jersey, because I think that's a bit, I don't know, it's a bit cold. I'd rather have a relationship with the brands and be more invested, and I think it kind of has more value. And also I can't, with these races, it's very hard to guarantee you're going to win anything nowadays, because you can't do too many races a year because it just smashes your body. And also it's getting so competitive that the chances of winning are getting slimmer and slimmer. But like I was saying earlier, I think there's you can give a lot more back. And I think by being really involved with hopefully the community and, trying to be helpful, I'm trying to do like my videos and stuff, which again is kind of, well, hopefully people enjoy them, and hopefully by showing people how I do things, it's useful. And then trying to help people through the kind of, through my kind of work side of life, which is kind of looking after sponsored riders. It's kind of hopefully it's helping the next sort of generation of people who are pretty good at it. So hopefully it's driving the sport forward as well. It's hopefully I like to think I'm doing good stuff. I'm not just taking from it, but because it's given a lot to me, in all honesty, in ways you don't even realise, so yeah, hopefully it's kind of it all balances out, and it's good for everyone.
So when you say looking after riders, what are you doing? Are you kind of helping them through the process, or is there a specific thing you do? Or
Well, a bit of everything. So as a brand, so Hump Bike Wheels, we support, like, we call it Hump Beyond, which is kind of all the riders that aren't like road racers or mountain bikers and things like that. It's people doing these odd races that I do. So I'm basically, we support riders with product, and I'm trying to help with kind of my experience to, a lot of these guys are doing events, guys and girls are doing these events. For example, the Atlas Mountain Race, which starts on Friday, I think, Friday night. So we've got 3 riders there, and none of them have ever been to Morocco or done that event. But I've been there 3 times. I've done the event. So I spent a bit of time just trying to just tell them like the really dumb basic stuff that you don't know until you've actually been there and done it, which saves them a lot of time, and hopefully give them energy to focus on other things. So hopefully they'll get better results. And if they get good results on Hump Wheels, then that's good for Hump Wheels. It's so it kind of helps everyone. So that's the kind of aim. And the more kind of funding and support that can go in to allow people to get to these events, the bigger the events are going to get. And, the more opportunity people get, the better. So that's what I'm trying to do through that side of things. And thankfully, Hunt have been very supportive of me over the years. And, I've managed to make it into somewhat of a semi-respectful position. And again, my other sort of brands I work with, I try and do similar, like Mason Bikes and Albion and, Tailfin. Just try and just help the best I can, and give as much back as I get out of it.
I mean, is it something that's really purposeful for you now? Because it sounds like, you're kind of you're quite happy in what you do.
Well, it's pretty cool, really. I kind of do a bit of work, and he gets to travel quite a lot, and cool doing bike races, some kind of work. I mean, there's worse things to be doing, isn't it? I mean, I think it goes back. I could be living in a little wooden shack with no heating and no food in somewhere, but actually, I get to do this stuff and kind of make a living off it. Live in a house and just about pay the heating bills. So
you're not gone primitive enough to get your fire out yet.
No, well, I haven't got a fire, so maybe that's the next thing. Well, look at me, I'm even wearing a blue t-shirt.
Josh, it's been really nice to talk to you. Would you like to kind of promote yourself a little bit? Do you want to put out some social media tags and stuff so people can find you? And then I'll probably say goodnight and let you enjoy the rest of your evening.
I think I've been promoting myself the last hour, haven't I?
Just a bit, but that's fine. That's the point.
Well, what is my social media? I think it's just my name. So Josh Ibbett, which is IBBETT, and then I've got a YouTube thing as well. So I've been doing a bit of work on that, and that is, I think it's the same actually. I should probably know this, shouldn't I? Yeah, I tried to promote myself and failed dismally. So
it's like rule one of social media: actually know where to send people.
know what your name is. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh well, thank you very much for talking to me. And good luck with the new stuff.
Thank you very much. Thanks for listening to my ramble.
No worries. Bye bye.